Cult Cinema Podcast.
No dead bodies for Dada tonight.
Give him that gun. Give him all the guns.
Hello and welcome everybody to episode 31 of the Cult Cinema Podcast. I am Gage.
I'm Ashley.
And today we are still talking about the Grindhouse double feature. Did Death Proof for the last episode, and this time we're doing Planet Terror.
What'd you think?
I enjoyed it very much. This was a very fun movie to watch.
It is
fun. I was recently talking about it to my buddy Sam, who's a huge Tarantino fan. Well, I don't know. I'd say they're a huge Tarantino fan, but a pretty big fan of Tarantino. But they were saying that they thought Death Proof was probably the worst Tarantino film, which, as we discussed in the previous episode, is not an unpopular opinion.
No.
But I don't know if I would go as far as to say that Death Proof was worse than Planet Terror. I feel like they're two very distinctly different movies.
Yes.
Both, of course, playing homage to the classic Grindhouse films of the 70s. But the Planet Terror is a lot more campy, like you mentioned. It's a lot more akin to the ridiculousness of those movies of the time.
Yes.
But I still had a lot of fun with this, as much as it is, like I said, a lot quirkier than Death Proof. This is very fun to watch, and it's Robert Rodriguez. Of course, I grew up watching Spy Kids,
right?
Which, funny enough, at the very beginning of Planet Terror, we get the fake trailer that was made for Machete. And if you've seen Spy Kids, you know that Machete is also played by Danny Trejo in that movie and is the kid's uncle, which is just hilarious to consider those being in the same universe. But
yeah.
Yeah, so there's that. What were your first... You've seen this movie before.
Yeah, I
right?
actually didn't even rewatch it because I've seen it at least a dozen times. So I was like, I know this by heart.
So what's your opinion on this movie?
I love this. I love it much more than Death Proof. Clearly, I've seen it, plenty of times.
Yeah.
I am a huge Rodriguez fan, though. Everything he touches, I'm like, I've got to watch it. So, yeah, I love it. I love the camp about it, the stupid dialogue, the crazy effects. Tom Savini's in this, but he also did all the effects as well. So, yeah, I love it. I think it's a super fun time.
Yeah, and of course there is a lot of crossover with Death Proof. There's a bit where I think one of the characters is listening to the radio and they say this one goes out to Jungle Julia.
Yeah.
Which I do believe that Planet Terror was actually made before Death Proof, if I'm not mistaken, but I believe the way that it was presented is that Death Proof was shown first and then Planet Terror, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so the Jungle Julia bit was added in post later.
Yeah.
So was the Red Apple cigarettes that are... the guy who owns the barbecue joint throws to Ray.
He gives to Ray, yeah.
Yeah, so... Yeah, a couple things to tie in the movies were added a little bit after, for sure.
So does this, since Tarantino's, all of his movies are within the same universe, does this then follow into his universe as well?
No.
Would you say? No?
No, nothing really falls into... Well, I think Rodriguez, too, as a director, even though you can tell when his hands are on something... He still has very distinctive directorial skills that I think, depending on the movie... he sticks to horror, obviously, or action for the most part. But one of my fun facts talks about the movie he was directing when he started writing this script, which was years before this even was an idea that they both had to do together. He had already put the first, 30, 40 pages together way before this became a thing, so...
Yeah.
I think he's just a good director.
Yeah.
Period. So.
All right. Well, if we want to go ahead and do a little bit of a quick scene breakdown, get the plot synopsis for those who haven't seen the movie.
Right. So I didn't do a ton of a synopsis.
Sure.
There's not a ton to this movie.
Yeah.
Basically, we have our cast of characters. Rose McGowan, of course, was in Death Proof and is in this film. Excuse me. She is a go-go dancer, but quits very quickly in front of the very first scene in the movie. He quits and wants to do something else. Fergie shows up randomly in this movie as a character.
I think the relationship that she has with, because we learned that there's like the doctor who's played by Josh Brolin and his wife, and they both work at this hospital, and there's tension between those two, but the wife is like trying to get away from the husband, and so I don't know if Fergie's character is supposed to be like her friend or her sister, because Brolin talks about how he keeps bringing up, well, you've been in contact with your sister, but watching some of the behind the scenes stuff, it seems like that character was intended to be her lover.
Yeah, it definitely was. Yeah,
okay.
That's her girlfriend at one point, and then as she's trying to leave her clearly horribly abusive relationship with Josh Brolin, we find out they were clearly more than related and friends, probably. Mm-hmm. It's never said outright, but you get it for sure. But the doctor herself, we have Ray, who is a ex-Marine military something or other. Everyone in this town, of course, gets infected with some sort of zombie virus. But this zombie virus is, I think, a little different than a lot of other zombie films, because they don't straight turn to zombies. They do eat people and, the whole 9 yards. But they kind of turn into, like, monstery blobs. Kind of
mutated monsters, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a game called Sunset Overdrive where it's kind of like it's kind of like this movie where it's very campy and it is zombies that are very much like that. But it's like an energy drink that like mutates people, but they're not quite zombies. They're kind of like these really weird, like puffy mutated creatures.
Yeah.
So yeah, that if anybody's if the 5 people that have played that game watch this episode, you'll know
I've never heard of it.
Yeah.
So this is a gas, though, that starts infecting people. That's how the infection starts to spread. And then, of course, the town gets overrun. We have our band of survivors, essentially, including Ray, Rose McGowan, then the other doctor, not Josh Brolin, his wife, which I think her name's Dakota in the movie. Yeah. And, they get overrun, eventually surviving, but not, without a bunch of casualties, including fucking dude from Terminator himself who plays the sheriff, Kyle Reese.
Who is that?
The actor, whatever his name is. I'd have to look it up. But
the guy who gets bit, that's him?
Yeah, the sheriff who his brother owns the barbecue joint.
Oh, yeah.
That's Kyle Reese.
Oh, holy shit. I didn't even recognize him.
Yeah.
That's wild.
And Bruce Willis, too, obviously pops up. So for a short cameo type thing.
Yeah, he's in like a very small section in the beginning and the end.
Yeah. And, of course, the very famous machine gun attached to Rose McGowan's leg. That has no business working, but it does. I mean, she can't, like, control it in any way, but somehow she shoots it, so fine.
Yeah.
And, they survive. A few people survive. Ray, unfortunately, does not make it to the end. But him and Rose McGowan have a relationship throughout the film, and he has a famous line that he never misses, and he ends up impregnating her because he never misses, and she has a daughter with her towards the end of the film. Mm-hmm. So, leading people to survival, basically.
Yeah.
And that's about it.
Yeah, it's really wacky in the way that it's, everything about it is wacky. I can't really specify one particular thing, but Rodriguez actually has like a 10-minute commentary on how he did some of the effects. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's on the Weinstein Extras YouTube channel, if anybody wants to check it out. But it's really cool going into like how they, because for context, basically some of the zombies like rip Cherry, who is played by Rose McGowan, they basically rip her leg off, and so she gets taken to the hospital, and basically at first it's like more of like a wooden peg leg, and then eventually Ray, who's played by Freddie Rodriguez, makes an attachment for her leg that's basically an M16 machine gun with a grenade launcher attachment, which is awesome. But again, like you said, there's no fucking way that it doesn't make any sense how she's able to just fire it like that. But basically what they did is they put her leg in a like thigh-high cast so that way she couldn't bend her knees to make the movement more realistic, because they would end up just replacing her leg with the gun in CGI. That's another thing that really kind of makes this movie stand apart from Tarantino, is that Tarantino was all about, we're doing it for real, the old school filmmaking way, and Rodriguez is very much bringing in these newer filmmaking ideas, you know, in terms of the development and the post-production of this. Like, a lot of the storyboarding was done with, you know, CGI animatics and doing video boards, which is basically, if you're unfamiliar, doing like how some people traditionally would like draw out frames for storyboards. Basically, the process for this is just using like a digital camera and just actually framing it up and doing it for real with like stand-ins to get an idea.
I did read somewhere that he used, even though they had such a low budget, they used a very expensive camera to try to shoot a lot of these action scenes, like $1 million camera or something crazy. But then he still did the same kind of, what did they call it? Like rubbing of the film, so they'd make it grimier and look grimier. Even though he used some very expensive technology and equipment, he still did try to keep with the same thing Tarantino did. Yeah.
As part of that video, he does mention that any time that the scene becomes real tense or there's a lot of action, the more degraded the visuals look in terms of like film scratches and skipping and stuff like that, to really kind of, it's the same reason when you would use like a handheld shaky cam in an action scene to just, you know, get you going, I guess the best way to put it.
That's fair.
To show that like there's some serious shit happening now. And to emphasize that. So I think that's pretty cool. Of course, he also put in a few small things, like anytime somebody makes a chop or a punch like motion, the film would actually like, it would stutter. But yeah, that's pretty cool. And I'm pretty sure, a lot of it, there was a lot of CG and compositing. As we know, Tarantino is very old school, shoots on film, did all of the like film scratches manually, which I don't know. I think Rodriguez, I'm guessing he would have shot this digital then. Was it shot on film? No, he did still
shoot with film.
Okay.
Except, for a couple of those scenes, specifically, I read when Bruce Willis turns into like his blobby monster, they use that kind of expensive film camera, whatever you want to call it. I guess camera, because it would be digital. And then every scene with Cherry and that gun leg is all straight digital altered. Yeah. So, yeah. And you can kind of tell, even though it's at night when she has that gun thing on her leg, for the most part, you can tell a little bit of a crisper picture when she's focused on versus, I think, other parts of the film that do look grainier and stuff like Death Proof, for sure. Yeah.
Well, Rodriguez is really going for making this because it's, supposed to be like a B movie, which are inherently already have really janky CGI and stuff like that. So he was kind of like, it just kind of worked that it was already kind of CGI, just like playing around with some of the effects, and like how he first did the test shot for doing the gun leg. It was like, oh yeah, this works good enough. We'll just use that. But yeah, that's the best way that I can describe it, is in terms of like the CGI and everything is very like sci-fi original B movie Sharknado type shit.
Yeah, but this movie is so bad it's good, but it wanted to be that.
Right, exactly.
He was also quoted like, I wrote terrible dialogue. I made terrible decisions with costumes and, aside from the cast, who's all wonderful, things like that. He was like, I wanted it to be bad. That was the point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what was it? Rose McGowan, she actually ended up doing a lot of her own stunts on this movie as well.
They were dating at the time.
Her and Rodriguez? Mm-hmm. I guess that would make sense. Yeah, because some of the behind-the-scenes stuff, like some of the video boards that they did, it looks like they're inside someone's house. I assume it's probably his or something like that. But yeah, that makes sense. But of course, she did have a stunt double, as most actors and actresses that do their own stunts usually will have some kind of stand-in or stunt double. But she did a lot of her own stunts, wire work and stuff like that, which is always really cool to see. And speaking of stunts, Zoe Bell actually makes a cameo in this movie as well. Josh Brolin's character, there's like a EMT like paramedic assistant that's real quirky, and he ends up getting eaten alive by 2 zombies, one of which being Zoe Bell. And I think she did some other stunts as well in there.
She did all the stunt work for Dakota, the blonde one, the blonde doctor.
Gotcha.
Yeah, she did all her stunt work. But yeah, Rose McGowan, you know, for as much as she is outspoken and says things today that not all I agree with, but most I do. I mean, she's been clearly through some trauma and, you know, is trying to come out better for it. Underrated actress. I mean, 2000s, late 90s, 2000s, Rose McGowan, come on.
It's one of those, again, it's one of those actors or actresses that where the name rings a bell, but I can't tell you a single other movie that I recognize her from.
She's in another one we're going to do called Jawbreaker. Okay. It's like a Heathers reboot, but it's 90s. Oh. It's really good.
Cool.
Caden and I watch it all the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, right. She's in a bunch of stuff that's, you know, she does really good. I think she's a great actress.
Yeah. There were, of course, a couple other actors in this movie that were also just like friends or other colleagues of Rodriguez's. Rodriguez, Z apostrophe S.
We got it.
Yeah. But the what's his name? His name is Skip, and that's his real name. But he's the like the Go-Go Club, like the owner. Yeah. That's Rodriguez's realtor. And also the Dr. Felix, who's the doctor that works alongside Josh Brolin's character, is Rodriguez's real like doctor that they brought in. And he was the guy that kind of helped with all of like the medical terminology and helping explaining how like the virus is working and everything like that. And apparently he was having a hell of a time just trying to be himself on camera.
Yeah. Well, he's not an actor.
Right. Yeah.
It's okay.
But yeah, I guess Josh Brolin was really giving him a hard time. But like you said, he's not an actor, and of course you can read the lines and you can have it memorized, but it's not until you have the cameras on you and a crowd around you that you can really lock up. So, But yeah. So you had mentioned that you had you wanted to go a little bit deeper in terms of like the Grindhouse trivia and history in the last episode.
Yeah, so I kind of, to quote this movie, shot my load on the last one a little bit.
Gotcha.
There's not a whole lot more out there for Grindhouse films as far as like the history and things like that. We talked pretty good in depth about it last week, but I did, which I'll pull up now. I looked up and I looked through a bunch of different websites. So this isn't the only one out there by far, but I liked this website in particular. It's called Anti-Film School, and they have a lot of really good articles on here, but they have a 10 best list of Grindhouse movies, and I thought we could just talk about a couple of those.
Yeah.
Because we kind of mentioned that last week, and I couldn't really think of any. Again, most of these are pretty horror genre related.
Sure.
As most Grindhouse films are. But number 10 is I Spit on Your Grave from 1978. And this movie is graphic as fuck, especially for the 70s.
Yeah.
It depicts rape. It depicts open body cavities, super trashy men, and yeah, plenty of sex and violence. It's crazy. So, I Spit on Your Grave. They remade it in 2010, but it was not as gritty and gross as the original, and not even very scary. So, total fail with that reboot.
Since you had mentioned the R word, the forsaken word that we have to mention sometimes on this podcast because for some reason directors keep putting this shit in their movie.
Right.
There is a scene in Planet Terror where Quentin Tarantino himself, his character attempts to rape Cherry. So to go into a little bit more context, so the soldiers that are behind Bruce Willis's character, they basically all came in contact with this like DM2 chemical, and that's what's turning everybody into these zombie creatures. But it seems the more that you actually, take in this chemical, it actually reduces the decay of the body and the actual transformation.
It's similar to like Overlord, where the one guy
flips
into like a superhuman. He still gross and decaying, but he's more strong than he is zombie. It's the same kind of premise here.
But he's also, like, in Overlord, he's, like, taking more of it. In this case, it's like if they're not taking it, that's when they start to transform.
Exactly.
So it kind of has the opposite effect there. But anyway, so Tarantino, he's about to make a move, and they usually wear these respirators that feed the gas into them so they can keep breathing it. And he has it off for too long, and as he's going to make his move, he has his pants off, and we just see that his genitals are starting to fall apart, which is probably one of the most disturbing parts of this movie, if not the most disturbing part to me.
Yeah, it's gross. That's super gross.
Yeah, and he's just like, oh, I just got to be real quick about it. I was like, this is so fucked.
Yeah, it's so gross. If you really think about that in context, super gross.
Because he's just step by step, and it just more is just falling off of him.
And then eventually his, like, intestines come out, and, like, it's very graphic as far as how he actually dies. He's the only really super gory death in the movie. So.
Well, his death, so he does do, like, the full transformation, and he, like, vomits out this weird, like, thing that's supposed to be reminiscent of the creature from It. Or not the Thing, sorry.
The Thing, yeah.
But then that's shortly after is when McGowan or Cherry gets her machine gun leg and then blows him through the door. And
yep, takes care of that.
Yeah, but that was pretty cool. But yeah, to go back to some of the movies. Sorry.
Oh yeah, no, you're fine. You're fine. Feel free, chime in anytime. Number 9 is Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original from 1974.
Yeah.
I think this one's on here for a couple reasons. One, the premise of a killer who not only kills people with a chainsaw, but then wears their face as his face is obviously disgusting. It is based on the real life serial killer Ed Gein, which famously did this exact same thing. But they show at the beginning of the movie that this is they're supposed to make you think this is actual footage and stuff that actually happened. So I think it's one of the first movies I can think of where they tried to make the audience think this was real as it could be. I
know Blair Witch was another one.
Yeah, but this is in the 70s, so you know what I mean.
So,
really far back.
Right. So I would say that makes it even more impressive if they're able to pull it off. Trying to do, because I don't think, found footage was very much like seemed more of like around the kind of digital area, like post VHS, early like DV digital recording stuff like that, like Blair Witch and Cloverfield and stuff like that. I feel like that's when the found footage films really started to take off. But it's cool to hear that style of filmmaking was still being made in the 70s.
It's only for a portion of the opening part of the movie, and it's only because it's supposed to be the news crew following the police into the home. Yeah, and then Leatherface pops out and he kills all of them. So it's after all the murders, essentially, that we see throughout the film. But it's still very. It's supposed to scare you, and it does. Honestly.
Gotcha. Yeah, there's another horror film from the 90s that. It's called Begotten. I don't recommend you watch it, and I'm telling this to you as even a horror fan. This movie is fucked.
Okay.
But it's a movie from the 90s, and it's shot on 16 millimeter. But like the intro, it's like someone walking through the woods, and it's very much like, I don't think it's supposed to look like a found footage thing, but I think it's just sloppy camera work that makes it look like a found footage.
Okay.
But that's like the earliest example I can think of.
Well, now I gotta find
found
it.
Footage. Don't watch it. It's fucking awful. It's so disturbing.
Like fucked up or like it's bad?
Like fucked up. Like,
yeah, now I gotta find it.
Yeah. All right. Well, you've been warned.
I have. I won't hold it against you.
But yeah. All right.
Number 8 is Faster Pussycat Kill Kill from 1965. This would actually be a pretty fun one to do at some point if we want to do like a throwback something.
I love watching old movies, like freaky movies from the 60s and 50s.
It's a sexploitation film, so there's more sex than anything else, than gore or anything, but action. This is an action-oriented one instead of a horror, for sure.
Okay.
El Topo from 1970. I don't know if this is in Spanish or not. I couldn't find that specifically. I think it's probably subtitled or something now. But this is more of a urban legend type movie. It's a Western setting, but El Topo's supposed to signify like a lone gunslinger, but it's also kind of playing on the legend of this portion of the country at the time.
Okay.
So very graphic as far as like deaths and stuff go. So number 6 is The Street Fighter from 1974. Again, action based.
Like the video game?
Kind of like the video game. It is out of Asia. This is subtitled for sure. This did receive an X rating initially, and then they had to scale it down as the years went on so people could actually like see it in theaters. But
Gotcha.
Very gory as well, as far as that goes. Halloween, the original, is on here. And
What?
I really didn't think of this. But it's on every list. Like, every list I found, Halloween's on there somewhere. For sure. And I have to assume that it's more because it was an independent film at the time.
Yeah.
And it's the start of the slashers, for real. Like, someone using a knife
That's
to kill
true.
people.
But there's not like a whole lot of like gore in Halloween from what I remember, at least the original.
There's 0 blood in it.
Yeah.
There's blood on a sheet, and that's it.
Huh.
So, yeah,
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah. I can, like you said, I think it just being an independent film, like independent horror film specifically, is probably why it's on that list. But
Yeah. Number 4 is Rob Zombie's, for this film that he did the trailer for, is Isa, She-Wolf of the SS. It is an actual film from 1975.
oh,
Very sexually graphic. Lots of the R word everywhere. And it's based on women in prison. So
okay,
lots of
interesting.
crazy shit that happens there. Number 3 is Thriller, A Cruel Picture. I've never heard of this film, but once I started reading it, I'm definitely going to start to watch it. It's a Swedish film.
Okay.
It's a rape revenge film. So this girl, literally, I think she's 10. This happens to her, and then she grows up and just like kills everybody. Straight killing spree. So.
Okay.
Number 2, Cannibal Holocaust, 1980. You cannot find this film any longer. It has been pulled from pretty much every place you could find it. You can't rent it. It's not on streaming. It's so repulsive and disturbing.
Yeah.
I've only seen clips of this film since, again, you can't really find it. But
I mean, with a title like that, I can almost imagine why.
it's not just a cannibal style film where people are eating people.
Mm-hmm.
Google the film and you'll see some of the like stills from it. The one I'm looking at right now, this woman's impaled on some kind of pole and it's going from her vagina through her mouth. So that's disgusting. And it's number
Damn.
2 probably
What-
for a reason.
Yeah. God, what must be number 1?
Number 1 is another movie I hadn't seen, just titled Zombie from 1979, and it's an Italian film. Lucio Fulci is considered the godfather of gore because he started all the open body cavity type effects.
Gotcha.
But this one's supposed to be kind of funny and cheesy too, but extremely gory and nudity everywhere. So,
I mean, I don't understand how Cannibal Holocaust isn't number 1 if you literally can't find it anywhere.
I'm wondering, let me read real quick here. Blood and guts everywhere. Yeah, it doesn't say too much about how like gratuitous it is or how violent it really is. It might just be strictly based on the director. I don't know.
Okay. Maybe.
But yeah. That's the top 10 list from Alt Film School. Obviously, we'll tag them at the end.
Yeah.
That I just wanted to share a kind of why the movies are considered Grindhouse and why they, get to that status for sure.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And then I just have fun facts, so whatever else you have.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much left. So at the very, very end of the movie, we do see a clip of Dakota's little boy.
Yeah.
Spoiler, alert.
It's not at the end.
Right. I get it. It's kind of like halfway through.
Yeah.
But basically, the mom has to go into a house, and she gives the little boy a gun and tells him, don't point it at yourself and shoot anybody that tries to come into this car that's not me. And she gets out of the car, takes a few steps. We hear a gunshot. She looks back, and he has shot himself in the head.
Yep.
And this is probably... It's a very campy movie altogether, but this is the one that's, like, kind of, like, really unsettling and, like... that and the fact that it's a kid and the way that it happened, it being an accident. And so this little boy is Tony Rodriguez. This is Robert Rodriguez's son who plays him.
His name's actually Rebel.
Is it Rebel?
Yeah. But I call him Rebel.
Tony's his name in the movie, isn't it?
Yes. Tony's his name in the movie.
Yes. I was getting that mixed up.
But yeah, it is his son. Yeah.
And so this was Rodriguez trying to, like, bring something that he truly found horrifying into the movie. And oh boy, does it pack a punch. But there was actually Rodriguez wasn't really sure if he wanted to include this into the movie or not. So a lot of additional shots were made, that take place after this event where, the kid's still alive, and, he's hiding in the barbecue shack. He's hanging out. He's sitting with the babysitters. There's even a shot where they, him and Dakota, like, walk to the helicopter and everything. But they decided to go with the scene where the kid accidentally kills himself. Mm-hmm. And
yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah.
Child murder, child death is always kind of a lot.
Yeah.
No matter what frame it's in, for sure.
And it's one thing where, like, in Piranha, where the kid gets his head bitten off and it just looks like really shitty CGI. Like, that's one thing. But, like, this is like a 10-year-old playing with a gun and accidentally killing himself, being integrated into a movie that has a completely different tone.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it really kind of throws you off guard there for a little bit.
It does. Yeah.
Yeah. So, with that's pretty much all the main stuff that I had there.
Okay.
So.
Well, I have a bunch of fun facts because obviously this movie was pretty fun overall.
Let's do it.
Aside from the downer we just talked about.
My bad.
No, it's fine. I have some more info about him in particular, the son, too. So.
Okay, cool.
So I kind of talked about when Rodriguez started writing this movie. He is also the director of another amazing movie that we probably should watch called The Faculty. It's horror. It's very B-movie / now it's widely considered an amazing horror film, but back in the 90s it was following a lot of the tropes of 90s horror, and but I love it. It's one of my favorites. But this was in 1999, and he started writing this movie, and like I said, got stuck around the 30-40 page mark, and didn't pick it up until this collaboration with Tarantino kind of came out of the woodwork, and he decided to finish the script. So I thought that was kind of cool that he already had it in his brain that far back.
From what I read, I think he was originally he was working with his friend Tommy Nix on trying to make a zombie movie for years, and once they finally got the opportunity to do this, they he brought Nix on, and he actually plays the paramedic, like the quirky paramedic. That gets eaten alive. By Zoe Bell. So. Yeah,
that's awesome. The score of this film, original score, I should say, featured a lot of John Carpenter music. So a lot of songs from some of his movies, Escape to New York, The Thing, Halloween. He did end up writing a couple songs for the film, but Rodriguez ultimately just took over that role as well and pretty much scored the entire thing himself. There's snippets of Carpenter songs heard throughout the film, but there's not an actual track of his any longer.
Rodriguez was very heavily involved in all aspects of this movie when it came, not just directing, but also being the director of photography and taking care of a lot of the editing and, pre-production, post-production, audio. Yeah. He did everything.
Escape to New York's a really good one too. We should do.
Yeah. It's been on my list for a while, just because I love Kurt Russell, especially his character in The Thing, and
yeah, he's really good.
And I know that the game Metal Gear Solid, the guy Solid Snake is the main character, who is very much based on Russell's character from this movie. So.
Yep. Yeah, it's really good. We should do it eventually.
I'm down.
Like we talked about, one of the most iconic scenes in the movie, of course, is when Cherry Darling, Rose McGowan, has a huge machine gun encased in her leg. And you talked about the cast, but in order to make the CGI easier in post, they actually used green and gray first aid tape on top of this, like, swaddled type material. So that she said it was the most uncomfortable thing she's ever done.
Oh yeah,
she
it
had
does
to
not,
constantly
from the video. It does not that I've seen. It does not look like something comfortable to wear.
Yeah.
But I saw that they also got some scenes like where she's like moving her leg around, pretending to fire. They also got reference of like a gun actually like firing blank in the same position for the reference for the CGI.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. One of the staples in Grindhouse cinema is to feature extremely famous people in a lot of their marketing campaigns, whether or not they're involved with the film. So obviously most famous people are not involved in films, but a lot of marketing campaigns would take snippets of other trailers featuring famous actors and actresses, shove them into theirs, and that would get people, of course, to come see the film. Bruce Willis is that person in this movie, obviously being very highly billed in the credits, but he only has like 2 scenes in the film and shot for I think a total of 2 days. So yeah, not very.
I'm wondering if that's Rodriguez like wanting him to be a bigger part, but him probably Willis probably requesting more money and Rodriguez not wanting to pay it. Maybe.
No, actually, they had just worked together on Sin City.
Okay.
Like the year prior, 2 years prior, and he loved working with Rodriguez. And he said, anytime you want to just do something quick or I can fit it in, I'm down. Like I'll cameo, I'll do whatever. So
okay, I was
that's
completely
how that
wrong.
came about.
Sorry, Bruce Willis.
He is an angel. Leave him alone. We just talked about Tony, the son who fatally shoots himself when left alone in his mother's car. Rodriguez was quoted as saying the material was so disturbing that he didn't want to inflict any of that psychological harm on a young actor, so he used his own son and explained to him for months up until shooting this scene, this is play and make-believe, and you never touch guns. He was very adamant about making sure his young son at the time didn't think that playing with guns is fun. He also never let him see the film until he was older, so he never actually knew he died until much later, since he was, I think, 10 when they shot this. So, there's tons of crossover. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just gonna say that's probably a really good idea. I mean, I grew up I grew up playing violent video games and watching violent movies, but this was at a time, early 2000s when, violent video games, they looked like just a bunch of, fancy blocks put together, and it was not very as graphically intense, didn't look as good as video games do today. But like I would not let my 10-year-old play fucking Call of Duty or anything like that.
No.
Or anything.
I wouldn't either if I had a choice. We kind of already talked about a bunch of crossover between the films, but something I thought that was kind of cool is the Bone Shack, the restaurant that they feature, is also Jasper's garage in Death Proof, where they're fixing up his Death Proof car that they show in that scene. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. I mean, these were both shot back to back with pretty much the same production crew, and so that makes sense.
Right. The coming attractions idea and the fake trailers that we've already went through last episode, so if you missed that, go back, listen to that. Those are almost as famous as both films are nowadays, and they really came from the emphasis of Tarantino wanting to have longer trailer screenings like that. Apparently he does this at his own home, so he wanted to kind of create that experience with this movie and have a bunch of longer trailer type things, and of course one that gets made into a movie down the road, Machete. So
apparently Tarantino also owns like his own movie theater where like he'll often premiere a bunch of stuff like from him, and kind of has like mini film festivals and stuff like that.
Yeah, every few Halloweens they'll do a Death Proof marathon of Death Proof and
Nice.
Planet Terror. So yeah. Rodriguez was noted in that interview that I kind of mentioned we both watched. I don't know if you heard him say this, but he likes to feature nudity early on because he thinks, one, it's kind of tacky to have it throughout the entire film, but two, it kind of makes the audience think that the whole movie is nudity when actually it's not. So they're always kind of waiting for like the next thing.
Yeah.
Like, when's the next titty? When's the next butt? Like, when is it? But he never does that in most of his films.
Yeah.
So, you talked about the doctor. Some of the images you see in the hospital when their patients start coming in with the virus, things like that, are actual stills from patients from this doctor for like infected people and stuff like that. So I thought that was crazy. Yeah, really gross. Tom Savini, we kind of talked about him. He is in the movie. He plays a deputy. He wanted his death to be one of the goriest deaths in the film, and he is probably the second goriest. He gets basically drawn and quartered, and his limbs get torn off.
He just gets completely ripped apart. I love how it's like the sudden cut where it's like, all right, it's his body, and then a very clear cut to where it's just a dummy that's getting pulled apart.
Yeah. Yeah, he said in an interview that, so when he's being splayed out and that, you know, the camera's close to his face and you can see it's actually his arms. And then, when you flip away and he's like, I made that dummy look like a sack of potatoes with a head and a bunch of blood.
Exactly what it looked like.
Yep. And finally, arm of a lighting crane is visible at 43 minutes and 16 seconds. And Rodriguez was like, I didn't bother to take it out. Who cares? It was a bunch of mistakes in this movie, and it's a B-movie type plot, so just leave it in there.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, if you're going for a B-movie plot, I think it's okay to leave a couple things in there, and you can just say that you did it on purpose and call it a day. Yep.
And those are my fun facts.
All right. Well, then.
I'm glad we did this series, though.
Yeah, it was good. I haven't seen either of these movies. I consider myself a fan of Tarantino, even though I don't think I've seen all of his stuff. I think Once Upon a Time in Hollywood I think that might be the only one that he's directed that I haven't seen yet at this point.
I have not seen all of them either.
Gotcha.
But I can't tell you which ones I haven't seen.
Yeah. And I think we've talked about potentially doing From Dusk Till Dawn at some point, haven't we?
Yeah, we won't do it now since we just did a bunch of this, but yeah, it's on the list for sure.
Well, do we have anything planned for the next episode?
So, everything that's basically on the list, aside from Dead Poet Society, is still in the 90s. So, we'll just, or 90s or 2000s, so we'll just stick with that. So, next we'll do Fight Club.
All right. I
haven't seen it in years.
Oh, it's so good. I watch Fight Club at least like once a year. I have a Fight Club poster in my living room. It's Brad Pitt just holding a piece of soap.
Yeah.
It's the first thing people see when they come into my apartment is just a Brad Pitt's face on my wall. It's great.
The soap.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, we'll do Fight Club next.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for tuning into this episode of the Cult Cinema Podcast. If you enjoyed it or have any recommendations for what movies we should do in the future, feel free to leave them in the comments or in your review. Let us know. It'd be much appreciated. Thank you again for watching, and we will see you in the next one. Oh, and don't forget to follow us on Instagram for sneak peeks before we or at the time that we release the episodes. So that way you know what the episode's going to contain and what movie we're doing. So thank you all again for watching or listening, and we'll see you in the next one.